The room was his. The applause, the praise, the perfect fiancé on his arm. Ethan Hayes had finally achieved everything he believed he deserved. So he raised a glass to his own brilliant future, delivering a brutal, mocking tribute to the ex-wife he called a footnote in his life story. He was certain she was a ghost of his past, a pathetic failure he had successfully erased. He never considered that ghosts can walk or that they might show up to the party. And this one was about to step through the door, looking like a queen, escorted by the one man who could end it all, the billionaire who signed Ethan's paychecks. The Crystal Atrium, at the heart of downtown Chicago, was a cathedral of modern opulence. Towering glass walls stretched 3 stories high, offering a panoramic, glittering view of the city's relentless energy. Inside, beneath a suspended installation of what looked like 1,000 diamond raindrops, the city's elite mingled. The air hummed with the clinking of champagne flutes, the murmur of polite but calculating conversation, and the soft ambient jazz played by a live trio. This was the engagement party of Ethan Hayes and Tiffany Carrington, and it was less a celebration of love and more a coronation of their combined ambition. Ethan Hayes felt like the king of this glass castle. At 35, he was a senior vice president at Sterling Innovations, the titan of the tech world. He was handsome in that sharp corporate way, a jaw-line that looked like it was carved to close deals, hair meticulously styled to suggest both creativity and control, and a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Tonight, he was radiating a smugness so potent it was practically a second cologne. His fiancée, Tiffany Carrington, was the perfect accessory to his success. Her family's name was etched onto university buildings and museum wings. She was blonde, beautiful, and possessed a smile that could disarm a hostile takeover. She looked at Ethan not with adoration, but with the quiet satisfaction of a shrewd investor whose portfolio was performing above expectations. After an hour of air kisses and feigned delight at identical congratulatory remarks, Ethan stepped onto a small, elevated platform, tapping a fork against his glass. The room quieted, a sea of expectant faces turning toward him. Tiffany stood beside him, her hand placed possessively on his chest. "Wow," Ethan began, his voice smooth and practiced, the kind of voice that could sell you a dream or a lie with equal ease. "Just, wow. Look at all of you. To have our dearest friends and family here to celebrate with us, it means the world." He paused, letting the sentiment hang in the air. "I'm the luckiest man in the world. I have the most beautiful, intelligent, and supportive partner in Tiffany." He leaned over and gave her a kiss that was just a little too performative. "And I have a career that's, well, it's finally taking off in the way I always knew it could." He continued, a smirk playing on his lips. "It's funny how things work out. Sometimes to reach your full potential, you have to shed dead weight. You have to cut out the things and the people that are holding you back." A few uncomfortable coughs rippled through the crowd. Anyone who had known Ethan for more than a few years knew he was referring to his ex-wife, Scarlett. Their divorce had been finalized just over a year ago. Ethan had been masterful in crafting the narrative. She was unambitious, lazy, a drain on his energy and his aspirations. "I'm not one to speak ill of the past, but," he said, a blatant lie, "but let's be honest, some people are just comfortable with mediocrity. They lack the vision, the drive. They're happy to coast in your slipstream, perfectly content to be a footnote in the story of your life." He took another sip of champagne, emboldened by the alcohol and his own ego. He felt untouchable. "I remember," he said, a cruel chuckle in his voice. Back when we were struggling, I was working on the initial pitch for the Chimera project. For those of you who don't know, that's the project that earned me my first major promotion at Sterling. I was pulling 20-hour days, living on coffee and sheer will. And I came home one night completely exhausted, my brain fried, and I saw her, my ex, watching some mindless reality TV show. She looked up at me from the couch and said, "Are you done with your little computer game yet?" He shook his head, feigning a kind of weary disappointment. A little computer game. That game is now the foundational software for Sterling's entire logistics division. But that was the difference between us, you see. Vision. I saw the future. She saw a distraction from her television show. I was building an empire, and she was worried about who was getting voted off the island. Laughter, this time more confident, erupted from a few of his newer colleagues who only knew the Ethan Hayes success story. Tiffany squeezed his arm, a look of faux pity on her face that was meant to convey deep sympathy for his past hardship. "So I guess what I'm really saying is, thank you," Ethan concluded, raising his glass higher. "Thank you to everyone who believed in me, and a special thank you, wherever she is, to my ex-wife for showing me exactly what I didn't want in a partner. She was the anchor I had to cut loose to finally let my ship sail. To Tiffany, to the future, and to shedding the dead weight." The room erupted in applause, a mixture of genuine enthusiasm from those who bought his story and polite obligation from those who knew better but wouldn't dare challenge the man of the hour. Ethan's gaze swept across the room, a conquering hero, basking in the glow of his own fabricated legend. He was on top of the world. His past was buried, his future was golden, and the woman who knew the truth was a nobody, probably sitting alone in her tiny apartment, watching reality TV, just as he'd described. It was in that precise moment of supreme arrogance, as the applause began to die down, that the great glass doors at the far end of the atrium swung silently open. The shift in the room's atmosphere was instantaneous and absolute. It wasn't a gradual change. It was a physical drop in pressure, as if all the air had been sucked out of the atrium. The lingering applause choked and died. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Heads turned one by one like a chain reaction of disbelief, all drawn to the entrance. Standing there was Scarlett Johansson. But it was not the Scarlett of Ethan's cruel caricature. It was not the woman he had spent the last year describing to anyone who would listen as a mousy, defeated homebody. The woman in the doorway was a vision. She wore a bespoke emerald green gown that clung to her figure, the color a startling jewel tone against her pale skin, and the dark, lustrous waves of her hair which fell over one shoulder in a style of effortless elegance. Her face, which Ethan had once called uninspired, was luminous, her expression calm and composed, holding a quiet power that was more commanding than any shout. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. The collective gasp from the guests was almost audible. This was a resurrection. Ethan's jaw literally fell open. The champagne flute in his hand tilted a small stream of expensive bubbles spilling onto the pristine white stage. Tiffany's perfectly manicured smile evaporated, replaced by a tight, hostile glare. She saw not a wronged ex-wife, but a sudden, inexplicable rival. But the true shock, the one that sent a tremor of genuine fear through Ethan, wasn't just Scarlett's presence. It was the man whose arm she held. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. His hair was streaked with a distinguished silver at the temples, and his face was one Ethan saw only in the company's annual reports or on the cover of Forbes. It was a face that commanded respect and more often fear. It was Damien Sterling, the reclusive, enigmatic, and utterly formidable billionaire founder and CEO of Sterling Innovations, a man who famously avoided social events, a man who had not attended his own company's holiday party in 5 years, a man who was by every conceivable measure the most powerful person in Ethan's professional universe. And he was standing there holding the door for Ethan's mediocre ex-wife, his expression one of quiet, protective intimacy. The jazz trio, sensing the seismic shift, faltered and fell silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the city outside the glass walls. Damien and Scarlett didn't rush in. They surveyed the room with an unhurried grace, their combined presence creating a gravitational pull that bent the entire party toward them. They were not crashing the party, they were claiming it. Ethan, his face now a sickly shade of pale, scrambled down from the stage, nearly tripping. Tiffany followed her movements stiff with fury. "Ethan, what is the meaning of this? What is she doing here?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. I don't know," Ethan stammered, his mind struggling to process the impossible scene. It was like seeing a character from a movie suddenly walk into your living room. He felt a desperate need to seize control of the narrative, to re-establish his dominance. He straightened his tie and marched toward them, trying to project an authority he did not feel. "Scarlett," he said, his voice straining to sound casual. "What a surprise." Scarlett's eyes, a deep, intelligent brown, met his. There was no anger in them, no pain, just a cool, level assessment that made him feel like an insect under a microscope. "Ethan," she said, her voice even and clear. "Tiffany, congratulations on your engagement." But it was Damien Sterling who spoke next, and his voice cut through the tension like a shard of ice. "Hayes," he said, his tone deceptively mild. He didn't offer a handshake. He looked from Ethan to the stage and back again. "We were just parking. Caught the end of your speech. It was illuminating." Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. "Mr. Sterling, sir, I had no idea you would be... I'm honored, but..." He trailed off, a pathetic fumbling of words. "I'm sure you are," Damien said, his gaze unwavering. "You mentioned the Chimera project, a cornerstone of our success, as you rightly pointed out." He paused, letting the silence stretch, amplifying Ethan's discomfort to an unbearable degree. "Funny you should tell that story tonight." Tiffany, seeing her perfect party unraveling, decided to intervene. "Well, this is all very dramatic," she said, with a brittle laugh, stepping forward. "But this is a private event. I'm not sure what you two are doing here, but..." "I invited him," Scarlett said simply. Her gaze shifted to Tiffany, and for the first time, a flicker of something sharp and dangerous appeared. "And he," she gestured to Damien, "invited me." Ethan felt a wave of nausea. "You two, you're together, yeah?" He asked, the words feeling foreign and absurd on his tongue. It was here that the first twist of the knife came. Scarlett gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. She looked at Ethan, her head tilted slightly. "You know, Ethan, your memory is getting worse," she said, her tone light, conversational, as if she were discussing the weather. But every person in the vicinity was hanging on her every word. "I remember that night with the Chimera pitch quite differently. You came home in a panic because the core algorithm had a fatal flaw and you couldn't find the bug. You said your career was over if you couldn't fix it by morning." She paused, letting the image sink in. "I wasn't watching reality TV. I was debugging the 40,000 lines of code I wrote for you. The little computer game, as you called it. I found the error in a recursive loop at 3 in the morning. I fixed it, reran the simulations, and put the completed pitch deck on your desk while you were asleep." She looked him directly in the eye. "Don't you remember? You took all the credit for my all-nighter in your performance review that year. You said it was a testament to your unrelenting dedication." Silence. A thick, suffocating silence. Ethan's carefully constructed narrative, the very foundation of the evening, had just been demolished with a few calm, factual sentences. He hadn't just been exposed as cruel. He had been exposed as a fraud. He stared at her, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. He looked at the faces of his colleagues, who were now staring at him with a dawning, horrified understanding. He looked at Tiffany, whose expression had morphed from anger to utter contempt. And finally, he looked at Damien Sterling, the man who owned his future, whose face was a mask of cold, unreadable judgment. The king of the glass castle was naked, and the ghost he thought he'd buried was holding a scepter. To understand the depth of Ethan's terror, you had to understand the architecture of the lie he had built his life upon. It wasn't a simple exaggeration or a white lie told at a party. It was the very blueprint of his professional existence. And Scarlett Johansson was its uncredited, invisible architect. Their story began not in a boardroom, but in a cluttered university library. Ethan was a business major, all charm and ambition, with a natural flair for presentations and a knack for telling people what they wanted to hear. He could sell an idea with intoxicating confidence. The only problem was, he rarely had any truly original ideas. Scarlett was the opposite. A computer science prodigy, she was quiet, introverted, and saw the world in patterned systems and elegant lines of code. While Ethan was networking at mixers, Scarlett was in the campus computer lab, losing herself in complex algorithms, her mind a place of dazzling innovation. They were a mismatch made in heaven for someone like Ethan. He was the showman. She was the genius behind the curtain. He was drawn to her brilliance like a moth to a flame. In the beginning, it seemed romantic. He was her champion, her advocate. "You're too brilliant to be stuck behind a screen," he would tell her. "You need someone like me to get your ideas out there. We're a team." And for a while, Scarlett believed him. She loved him, and she trusted him. Their partnership began with a class project. It was her groundbreaking concept, her code, her late-night work. But it was Ethan who presented it, earning a perfect grade and the admiration of the professor. "We did it," he'd said, hoisting the project paper in the air as if they'd won a championship. Scarlett, happy to see her work recognized, even if her name was secondary, celebrated with him. This became the pattern of their life together. When he landed his first internship, it was with a proposal she had written. When he got his first job at a small tech firm, it was by solving a complex coding problem in the final interview, a problem Scarlett had walked him through step by step the night before. He was always the face. She was always the engine. He was meticulous in his gaslighting. He framed it as a division of labor that played to their strengths. "You're the creator, babe, I'm the closer. It's the perfect synergy." He convinced her that her social anxiety and quiet nature would hold her back in the cutthroat corporate world. "They'd eat you alive in there," he'd say with a sympathetic tone. "It's better this way. We build our empire together from the inside out." The ultimate betrayal, the one that served as the foundation for his entire career at Sterling Innovations, was Project Chimera. It wasn't just a pitch deck or a bug fix, as Scarlett had so gracefully understated at the party. It was a fully fledged, revolutionary logistics management system that she conceived of and built almost entirely on her own over a period of 6 months. Ethan had been a junior project manager at Sterling, tasked with ideating new efficiency solutions. It was a vague corporate mandate he was hopelessly unqualified for. He came home every night stressed and complaining, feeling the pressure to produce something spectacular. Scarlett, wanting to help him to see him succeed, took on the challenge herself. She spent her nights and weekends in a fever of creation. She designed the architecture, wrote the code for the AI-driven predictive modeling, and developed the user interface. She filled notebooks with flowcharts and complex equations. It was her masterpiece. She called it Beacon because she thought it could guide companies towards smarter decisions. When it was done, she presented it to Ethan in their small apartment. He was stunned by its brilliance and completeness. "Scarlett, this is a billion-dollar idea," he whispered, his eyes wide with avarice, not admiration. This time, Scarlett insisted her name be on it. "We can present it together as a team," she said, her voice hopeful. "This is too big, Ethan. This is our future." He agreed. "Of course, babe. You're the star of this show." He took her work, her code, her designs, and told her he was scheduling a presentation with the senior leadership. For a week, he told her he was socializing the concept and laying the groundwork. What he was actually doing was meticulously scrubbing her name from every file, every document, every line of metadata. He renamed the project from Beacon to the more aggressive corporate-sounding Chimera. He rehearsed the presentation, memorizing her notes, learning to speak her language until he could deliver it as if it were his own native tongue. The day of the presentation, he told her it had been moved to a secure off-site location and that only senior VPs were allowed to attend for IP security reasons. He promised he would introduce her as the lead architect as soon as the project was greenlit. She waited at home, anxious and excited. He came home that night and popped a bottle of champagne. They loved it. "We got it," he shouted. He was promoted the next day. The project became his identity, his calling card. When Scarlett asked when she would be brought in, he started making excuses. "It's too sensitive right now," or "HR has a process for these things," or "they want the project to be associated with a single strong leader to start. That's me." The promises grew thinner and thinner, and a cold, horrifying realization began to dawn on Scarlett. He had never intended to give her credit. Her genius was not a gift he cherished, but a resource he had plundered. When she confronted him, he turned on her. The charming, supportive partner vanished, replaced by a cruel, dismissive stranger. "You're being naive, Scarlett. This is how the world works," he sneered. "You wrote some code. I made it happen. Ideas are worthless without execution." He started belittling her, chipping away at her confidence. He called her unambitious for not having a flashy career of her own, conveniently ignoring the fact that she had been working full-time on his. He told their friends she was becoming difficult and neurotic. The divorce was his final act of erasure. He used his new, high-powered salary to hire the best lawyers. He argued that she had contributed nothing financially to the marriage. He painted her as a dependent, a simple housewife who had no claim to his hard-earned success. Beaten down, emotionally exhausted, and with limited funds to fight a prolonged legal battle, Scarlett walked away with next to nothing. He had not only stolen her work, he had stolen her past, her confidence, and her name. He was certain he had left her so broken that she would never have the strength to challenge him. He never imagined she would find a partner who could buy and sell him 1,000 times over. Back at the engagement party, as she stood beside Damien Sterling, Scarlett wasn't just a woman at a party. She was the living, breathing evidence of Ethan's fraud. She was the ghost of his conscience, returned from the grave he had so carefully dug for her, and she was about to haunt him into oblivion. The silence that followed Scarlett's revelation was a living entity. It pulsed with judgment. Every guest in the atrium became a juror, and the verdict on Ethan Hayes was being delivered in their shocked, accusing stares. His carefully curated image of a self-made man had been shattered into a million pieces on the pristine floor of his own engagement party. Ethan stood frozen, a statue of pathetic denial. His mind raced desperately, trying to find a foothold in the landslide. That's a ridiculous exaggeration. He stammered, his voice thin and reedy. You're twisting things. You were always so emotional. It was a weak, pathetic defense, and everyone knew it. He was trying to use the same old tactics of gaslighting and dismissal, but they were useless now. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. He wasn't talking to his downtrodden wife in their apartment anymore. He was addressing a confident, poised woman, flanked by a billionaire. Scarlett didn't even dignify his accusation with a direct response. She simply held his gaze, her calm expression a more potent rebuttal than any angry words could be. It was Tiffany who broke the spell, her voice sharp as shattered glass. "So this is what this is about?" she spat, directing her fury at Scarlett. "You couldn't stand to see him happy, so you show up here to spread lies and ruin our night? How pathetic!" She turned to Damien Sterling, her tone shifting to one of fawning disbelief. "Mr. Sterling, I can't imagine why you'd associate yourself with someone so vindictive. Ethan is the most honest man I know." Damien Sterling, who had been watching the entire exchange with the quiet intensity of a predator, finally moved. He took a half-step forward, and the sheer force of his presence made both Tiffany and Ethan flinch. "Honesty, Ms. Carrington," Damien said, his voice low and dangerously calm, "is a quality I value above almost all others. In my business and in my life." He let his gaze drift from Tiffany to Ethan, and a flicker of utter contempt crossed his features. "Which is why I find this conversation so fascinating." He didn't need to raise his voice. His words carried the weight of absolute authority. He turned his attention back to Ethan. "Hayes, a word of advice. When you find yourself in a hole, the first rule is to stop digging." Without another word, he placed a gentle hand on the small of Scarlett's back. "I believe we've offered our congratulations," he said to her, his voice softening. "Shall we?" "Of course," Scarlett replied. They turned and began to walk away, not in a rush, but with the deliberate pace of people who know they have already won. They moved through the stunned crowd, which parted for them as if they were royalty. The message was clear. They hadn't come for a fight. They had come to make a statement, and the statement had been made. As they left, the spell broke and the room erupted into a chaotic buzz of hushed, frantic whispers. The party was over. The celebration had turned into a public execution. Ethan was left standing in the center of the room, exposed and humiliated. His colleagues, the ones who had been clapping him on the back minutes earlier, now avoided his eyes, suddenly finding their shoes or the ceiling architecture intensely interesting. Marcus Thorne, Ethan's direct superior and a senior executive VP, gave him a long, unreadable look before turning and walking briskly toward the exit phone already to his ear. Tiffany rounded on Ethan, her face a mask of cold fury. "How could you?" she seethed, her voice a low, vicious hiss. "You told me she was nothing, a nobody. You bring this This humiliation to my doorstep, to my family. Tiffany, baby, listen to me, Ethan pleaded, reaching for her. She's lying. She's a bitter, jealous ex, trying to ruin my life. Lying, Tiffany scoffed, slapping his hand away. She showed up with Damien Sterling. He doesn't go anywhere for anyone. Do you have any idea how this makes me look? How it makes us look? Her concern wasn't for his integrity, but for the social fallout. Her perfect engagement, her perfect fiancé were now contaminated. The brand was tarnished. I will fix this, Ethan insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. I'll talk to Sterling on Monday. I'll clear this all up. But even as he said it, he knew he was doomed. The look in Damien Sterling's eyes had not been one of confusion or curiosity. It had been one of confirmation. The following Monday, at the Sterling Innovations Tower, felt like a walk to the gallows. The normal morning buzz in the lobby was replaced by an eerie quiet whenever Ethan walked past. People would stop talking and stare. He could feel their whispers on the back of his neck. The news of the party and Scarlett's bombshell revelation had spread through the corporate grapevine at light speed. He made it to his office, a corner suite, with a view that had once made him feel powerful but now felt like a cage. He spent the morning trying to work, but he couldn't focus. His inbox was suspiciously empty. The usual torrent of morning emails from his team and superiors had been reduced to a trickle. He was being iced out. Just before noon, the call he had been dreading came. It wasn't from Marcus Thorne. It was from Damien Sterling's executive assistant, a woman with a voice so crisp and efficient it could make you shiver. Mr. Hayes, Mr. Sterling requests your presence in the main boardroom on the 50th floor. Immediately. His blood ran cold. The 50th floor was executive territory. It was where the real gods of the company resided. He had only been there once before for his final VP interview. With his heart pounding a funeral drum against his ribs, Ethan took the elevator up. Every floor he passed felt like another layer of his life being stripped away. When the doors opened, he stepped out into a hushed, cathedral-like space of polished marble and dark wood. He was led to the boardroom. The door was opened and he walked in. Seated around the massive mahogany table were Damien Sterling, Marcus Thorne, and the company's chief legal counsel. But that wasn't the second twist. The second twist, the one that truly extinguished the last ember of hope in Ethan's soul, was who was sitting to Damien Sterling's right, looking through a tablet with an air of calm authority. It was Scarlett. And she wasn't there as a guest or a +1. She was there as a principal. Damien Sterling gestured to the single empty chair at the far end of the table. Hayes, thank you for joining us. Ethan sat his legs, feeling weak. We have some business to discuss regarding Project Chimera. Damien began, his tone all business. I've been conducting a comprehensive review of our key intellectual properties, and some inconsistencies have come to light regarding Chimera's origins. He looked at Scarlett. As you may or may not know, I've been trying to identify the brilliant mind behind a new R&D initiative codenamed Beacon. It was an unsigned proposal of extraordinary genius that was flagged by our internal IP auditors last month. The conceptual framework and coding style bore a striking resemblance to the foundational code of Chimera, yet it was demonstrably more advanced. He paused, letting the words sink in. The official reports on Chimera, your reports, were polished, but the raw code, the early drafts, they had a unique signature, an elegance that frankly didn't match any of your subsequent more pedestrian work. Damien slid a file across the table. My team conducted a deep dive audit. We went back through old server logs, retrieved fragmented data from decommissioned drives, even analyzed the keystroke dynamics from the original coding sessions. We were looking for a ghost, a brilliant ghost who created our most profitable software and then simply vanished from our ecosystem. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Ethan's. The digital breadcrumbs didn't lead to you, Hayes. They all led to an external IP address, an address that we traced back to the apartment you shared with your then-wife, Scarlett Johansson. This audit began 6 weeks ago, long before your party, he gestured to Scarlett. So I sought out the ghost. I found Ms. Johansson, and I showed her our findings. I wanted to know if she was the true architect of Chimera. She confirmed that she was. More importantly, she showed me her original notebooks for Beacon, which she had conceived years ago. It turns out, my new favorite R&D proposal wasn't new at all. It was the sequel to Chimera that you were never smart enough to even imagine. I didn't seek Scarlett out for a date, Hayes, Damien said, his voice dropping to a low, chilling register. I sought her out for a job. 3 weeks ago, I hired her to be the new head of our entire Advanced Research and Development Skunkworks division. The relationship, he added with a pointed look, developed after we discovered a shared passion for innovation and a shared disdain for fraud. Ethan felt the floor drop out from beneath him. This wasn't a recent development. This wasn't his ex-wife getting lucky. This was a meticulous, systematic investigation. He hadn't just been caught at a party, he had been hunted, discovered, and exposed by the most powerful man he had ever known. His lie hadn't just been revealed, it had been scientifically disproven. The boardroom on the 50th floor felt like a courtroom and an operating theater combined. Ethan was on trial, and his career was being methodically dissected without anesthesia. The weight of Damien Sterling's revelation pressed down on him, crushing the air from his lungs. It wasn't a simple accusation. It was a completed autopsy of his entire professional life. That's, Ethan began, but his voice broke. There was nothing to say. The evidence wasn't just circumstantial, it was digital forensic and absolute. The ghost in the machine had testified against him. Marcus Thorne, who had remained silent until now, pushed a thick binder across the table. "This is the complete audit report, Ethan," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. It was the voice of a man severing a limb to save the body. Server logs, time-stamped code, commits from her IP address drafts of the proposal with metadata pointing to her laptop. It even includes a linguistic analysis comparing the technical language in the Chimera proposal to your other written work. The difference is, and I quote the report, statistically staggering. Ethan stared at the binder as if it were a venomous snake. He didn't need to open it. He was the author of his own fiction, and he knew how it ended. Damien Sterling leaned back in his chair, a study in controlled power. "The lie is impressive. I'll give you that, Hayes. The sheer audacity to take credit for a work of genius like Chimera, to build your entire career on it. It requires a certain kind of pathological ambition." He paused. "But that kind of ambition is a cancer in a company like this. We are built on innovation and integrity. You have made a mockery of both." It was then that Scarlett spoke. She hadn't looked at Ethan with pity or anger, but with a kind of detached finality, like a scientist observing a failed experiment. "The lie wasn't just about the credit, Damien," she said, addressing her boss, but ensuring Ethan heard every word. "It was about suppression. To maintain the lie, he had to ensure the true source could never emerge. He had to convince me that my ideas were worthless, that I was worthless. The real crime wasn't just the theft of my work, but the attempted murder of my potential. Her words were calm, precise, and utterly devastating. They reframed his crime from mere plagiarism to something far more sinister. He hadn't just stolen from her, he had tried to break her spirit to cover his tracks. Finally, the dam of Ethan's composure broke. The smug executive persona dissolved, revealing the desperate, terrified man beneath. "Scarlett, please," he begged, turning to her, his voice cracking. "Don't do this. We had years together. We were a team. I was trying to get us ahead. For us." It was a pathetic last-ditch appeal to a shared history he himself had desecrated. Scarlett looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time in that room. "There was no us, Ethan," she said, her voice firm, but without malice. "There was only you and your ambition, and me, the resource you exploited to feed it. You didn't just take my code, you took my confidence. You tried to make me small so you could feel big. The team you're talking about was a fiction you created to justify a heist." She then turned her attention back to the board, all business, once again. "As the new head of advanced R&D, my first initiative will be to launch Beacon 2.0. It will leverage the core principles of the original Chimera code, but integrate quantum modeling and predictive AI, pushing our logistics efficiency into the next decade. I have the roadmap laid out." She pushed her tablet toward the center of the table, and schematics and projections of breathtaking complexity and vision filled the screen. She was showcasing the brilliance he had tried to extinguish, and it was burning brighter than ever. That was her ultimate vindication. Not a scream, not a tear, but an undeniable, irrefutable demonstration of her superior intellect. She wasn't just reclaiming her past, she was claiming the company's future. Damien Sterling watched her with a look of profound admiration before turning his cold final gaze on Ethan. "Ethan Hayes," he said, the name sounding like a verdict. "You are terminated from Sterling Innovations, effective immediately for gross misconduct, willful misrepresentation of qualifications, and intellectual property theft." He wasn't finished. "Our legal department," he continued, gesturing to the council, "will be in contact with your lawyer. We will be initiating clawback proceedings to recover all bonuses and stock options granted to you on the basis of your fraudulent work on the Chimera project. That amounts to, I believe, 7 years of compensation." Ethan's face went white. This wasn't just firing him, this was financially ruining him. They were erasing him from the company's history and its payroll. Furthermore, Damien added, "A formal company-wide memo will be circulated this afternoon correcting the record on the attribution of Project Chimera. Ms. Johansson will be publicly credited as its sole architect. We believe in setting the record straight." He was being unpersoned. His one great claim to fame was being publicly stripped from him and handed to its rightful owner. He would be a laughingstock, a cautionary tale. "Security will now escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. You will then be escorted from the building," Damien said, his tone final. He had already dismissed Ethan from his mind. He turned to Scarlett. "Now, about the budget for Beacon 2.0. As two stern-faced security guards entered the room, Ethan felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. His world had completely inverted. The woman he had mocked as a mediocre nobody was now discussing multi-million-dollar budgets with his boss. The life he had stolen was being returned to its owner with interest. As he was led from the room in disgrace, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Tiffany's personal assistant. It was a screenshot of a press release already sent to the society pages. Tiffany Carrington and Ethan Hayes have mutually agreed to end their engagement. Ms. Carrington wishes Mr. Hayes the best in his future endeavors, but has come to realize due to recent revelations of fraudulent representations that their paths forward are no longer aligned. She will be spending the coming weeks focusing on her philanthropic work abroad. It was a cold, brutal, and public severing. She hadn't even had the decency to tell him herself. His fiancée, his job, his reputation, his money all gone in the space of 3 days. The ship he had so proudly boasted about had not just been anchored. It had been scuttled, and he was going down with it all alone in the cold, dark water. 6 months felt like a lifetime. From the 50th floor of the Sterling Innovations Tower, the city of Chicago sprawled out like a circuit board of infinite possibility, a view Scarlett now saw not as an intimidating landscape, but as a territory of her own making. Her office, the very one that had once been the command center for another executive, had been transformed. The dark mahogany and leather had been replaced with clean lines, whiteboards covered in complex equations, and glass walls that fostered a sense of transparency and collaboration. Prototypes of sleek, unidentifiable gadgets sat on shelves next to thriving green plants. It was a space that hummed with quiet, focused energy, her energy. This morning, she was at the head of a large oval table, leading the weekly progress meeting for the Beacon 2.0 initiative. Her team, a hand-picked collection of the brightest and most audacious minds in tech, was engaged in a heated but respectful debate about quantum encryption. "The decay rate is still too unpredictable," said Ben Carter, a young Caltech graduate with unruly hair and eyes that sparkled with intelligence. "If we can't guarantee stability, the entire security framework is compromised." "What if we're looking at it backwards?" Scarlett interjected, her voice calm but commanding. She stood and walked to the main whiteboard, picking up a marker. "Instead of trying to prevent the decay, what if we use the unpredictability itself as a feature? What if each quantum state's decay pattern becomes a unique one-time encryption key impossible to replicate because it's inherently random?" The room fell silent for a beat, a collective intake of breath as her team processed the paradigm shift. Ben's eyes widened. "A self-destructing, constantly evolving key? That's brilliant. It's fundamentally unbreakable." A grin spread across Scarlett's face. "Let's break it down." This was her new reality, a world where her ideas weren't whispered in desperation to a deceitful husband, but celebrated and built upon by a team that revered her intellect. The self-doubt Ethan had so meticulously installed in her psyche was still there, a faint echo in the back of her mind on quiet nights, but its voice was growing weaker every day. It was being drowned out by the chorus of her own success, by the tangible proof of her capabilities that surrounded her. She was not just a manager. She was a leader, a visionary, and for the first time in her adult life, her identity was wholly and indisputably her own. Later that afternoon, the door to her office slid open. Damien Sterling entered holding 2 coffee cups, a familiar ritual that had become a cherished part of their routine. He no longer looked at her with the calculating eye of a CEO who had found a valuable asset, but with an easy, unguarded affection that was more precious to her than any stock option. "Fuel for the revolutionary," he said, placing a cup on her desk. He gestured to the whiteboards, which now looked like the beautiful chaos of a supernova. "Solving the mysteries of the universe, Again, just trying to make sure our client's data doesn't get stolen by supervillains, she quipped, her shoulders relaxing in his presence. How was the quarterly earnings call? Profitable, he said, leaning against her desk, but profoundly boring compared to this. Our stock price jumped 3% when I mentioned the preliminary findings from Beacon. The street is calling you the Oracle of Sterling. Scarlett chuckled, a genuine, unburdened sound. Don't let it go to your head. I still need you to approve my budget. His smile was warm and full of admiration. Scarlett, at this point, you could tell me you needed to build a research facility on the moon, and I'd just ask you if you preferred a direct or connecting flight. He became more serious, his hand gently covering hers on the desk. This is what I saw in that initial proposal. This mind, this fire. I'm just the guy who was smart enough to get out of its way. Their relationship had become a sanctuary for them both. For her, it was the discovery that a man could be strong, without being domineering, supportive, without being patronizing. For him, a man accustomed to a world of transactional relationships, it was the discovery of a partnership so complete it felt like coming home. Speaking of flights, he said, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. I've been thinking. There's a little island off the coast of Italy that has no cell service, no internet, and the best pasta you've ever tasted. We could go next month. Disconnect for a week. She looked into his eyes and saw her future, a future of shared adventures, quiet moments, and boundless respect. I'd love that, she said, her voice soft. I'm finally where I was always meant to be. Miles away, in a soul-crushing expanse of suburban asphalt, Ethan Hayes sat in the driver's seat of his 3-year-old Toyota Camry. The engine was off. He was staring at the drab grey facade of Innovatech Office Solutions, a name so generic it was insulting. His downfall hadn't been a dramatic fiery crash, but a slow, grinding descent into mediocrity. The company-wide memo from Sterling Innovations had acted like a neutron bomb, destroying his reputation while leaving the building standing. He was blacklisted. The story of his public humiliation at the hands of his ex-wife and her billionaire boyfriend became the stuff of legend, a schadenfreude-laden cautionary tale told over expensive lunches he could no longer afford. The clawback lawsuit had been merciless, stripping him of his condo, his car, his savings. His entire net worth had been built on a lie, and the truth had repossessed it all. His new job was a daily exercise in humiliation. He sold second-rate printers and bulk toner cartridges to people who wouldn't have been allowed to schedule a meeting with his assistant in his old life. Today had been particularly brutal. He'd had a meeting with a mid-level office manager, a woman who had spent the entire pitch scrolling through her phone. As he was packing up his presentation materials, his hands fumbling with the cheap binder, she had looked up. "You look really familiar," she'd said, squinting. "Did you used to be somebody?" The question had twisted in his gut like a dull knife. "I was your boss's boss's boss," he wanted to scream. Instead, he just shook his head and muttered, "No, just have one of those faces, I guess." Now sitting in the deafening quiet of his car, the facade crumbled. The arrogance was gone, a hollowed-out shell. In its place was a simmering, pathetic rage. He still didn't see his own fault in the catastrophe. In the twisted narrative of his mind, he was the victim. Scarlett was the vindictive shrew who couldn't let him be happy. Damien Sterling was the predator who had stolen his life to get to her. He had been on the verge of greatness, and they had conspired to drag him down into this beige hell. His phone buzzed. It was a notification from a news app. He tapped on it. The headline read, "Sterling Innovations Soars." On Beacon 2.0, hype head of R&D, Scarlett Johansson, hailed as tech visionary. Below it was a picture of her and Damien at a tech gala. They were laughing, radiating a relaxed confidence that made Ethan's blood boil. She was incandescently happy, respected, powerful, everything he had ever wanted to be, everything he had pretended to be. He threw the phone onto the passenger seat as if it had burned him. The ghost of his former life was not just haunting him, it was thriving, celebrating on a world stage, while he was suffocating in a parking lot in Schaumburg, Illinois. He had tried to erase her, to reduce her to a footnote in his story. Instead, he had become a footnote in hers, the pathetic, forgotten villain in the epic tale of her rise. He finally understood his punishment. It wasn't the loss of money or status. It was the crushing, eternal knowledge that he was the dead weight and she was flying, and he would be stuck on the ground forever looking up. This isn't just a story about revenge, it's a powerful reminder about reclaiming your narrative and owning your worth. Scarlett's journey shows us that true success can never be stolen or gifted. It must be earned through talent and integrity. Her ultimate triumph wasn't just in exposing a lie, but in stepping into her own brilliance and refusing to be silenced any longer. It proves that a person's true character is revealed not when they're on top of the world, but when their carefully constructed world comes crashing down around them. What goes around truly does come around. If you were on the edge of your seat, watching Scarlett get her ultimate vindication, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life drama. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own power. Comment below with what you think Ethan's next desperate move should be. We'll see you in the next story.